Welcome to SAICA's Biz Podcast. My name is Naeem Asvat, the Regional Lead of SAICA. Today, we are going to unpack the 2026 budget. And to do that with me today is Fathima Dawood, who's a tax specialist as well as a member of SAICA's National Tax Committee. Welcome, Fathima, to the show.
Thank you, Naeem. It's so great to be here. The 2026 budget has brought some welcome relief measures for small businesses, and I'm quite excited to unpack these today.
Now, we look forward to you unpacking some of these interesting things that have happened in the budget speech. But let's start with the most important, or rather the biggest change that we were anticipating and expecting, VAT changes. Can you tell us a little bit more about the VAT changes that happened?
Okay, so one of the significant changes in VAT is that the compulsory registration threshold has increased from 1 million rand to 2.3 million rand. And what this means for smaller businesses is that the compliance burden has now been eased on them. So a smaller business might not necessarily have the required skills, or the owner might need to seek professional advice in order to complete its VAT returns. And by raising the threshold, the government is now giving smaller businesses the opportunity to focus on growing their business before the compliance burden becomes compulsory.
And I think that's an important change that has been made. From an economic growth point of view, we need economic growth from the small and medium enterprises. And I think that sector sorely needed this type of change that has come through, and to decrease the burden as such on them. But Shay, can you share with us the practical implications of implementation of these new thresholds? Now, we know we've got 1 million rand that is currently legislated, and we've got the proposal of 2.3 million rand. How is that practically going to affect businesses?
Okay, so that is a very good question. And I think a lot of taxpayers, business owners are facing that specific query. The 2.3 million threshold has become effective from 1 April 2026. So what that means is a business whose turnover exceeded 1 million rand prior to that would have an obligation to register for VAT prior to that. So unfortunately, with the new legislation coming in, prior non-compliance will not fall away. So my advice to business owners is to review your tax position and to seek professional help if you need to.
Fantastic. I think that's a very interesting topic to be discussed and rather unpacked at a later stage. There are a lot of practical implications that businesses need to know about. And I think you're quite right that these businesses need to get a tax specialist or a tax practitioner to assist. And what about a voluntary VAT registration? How would that work?
Okay, so that threshold has increased as well. So previously it was 50,000, it's now 120,000. And you might ask yourself, why do business owners want to voluntarily register? Some businesses want to claim input. So if they do, they now have to just meet a higher threshold.
So we have seen some major relief for micro businesses. And I think more importantly, that turnover has increased from the threshold from 1 million rand to 2.3 million rand, and the tax-free threshold has moved from 335,000 to 600,000. Would you be able to unpack how that will impact these micro businesses and how would it help them?
Okay, so practically a micro business now will not be paying tax on its revenue up to 600,000. So that's a meaningful change because we've gone from 300 to 600, so that's double. And then between 600,000 and 2.3 million, they will pay tax on revenue, not profits, at a much lower rate of tax. So this is quite a welcome relief measure for a micro business owner.
And I'm sure that's quite a significant win for the business community at that too, to have these changes or rather have these limits increased.
Mm. Yeah, so this was definitely a growth-focused budget.
So Fathima, please can you explain to our viewers today why, or rather what are the advantages of a turnover tax, and why would a micro business want to be a small micro business taxpayer? And what would be the difference then between turnover and your profit?
So that's a really good question, Naeem, because a micro business needs to assess if you pay tax on revenue as opposed to profit, you could make a loss in a year, but you're paying tax on revenue. And the biggest advantage of the turnover tax is that you've got a decreased record keeping. So you don't need to worry about record keeping. You don't need to assess your expenses for deductibility in terms of income tax. And a micro business, especially in their years of growing and things expanding, may not necessarily have a lot of staff, and they don't have finance teams. They won't need to go and seek professional advice on expenses and what they can deduct. And the turnover tax rates are quite low, so they are attractive. Just coming from that point of view, where there's no detailed record expense keeping, there's no requirement to assess the deductibility. So it's something that a micro business will need to assess, and there's no one size that fits all, but definitely something to consider.
Would you then agree with me that the compliance burden is a lot more less for these micro businesses, and I think it's less and a little bit more with the increase in the thresholds?
Yes, definitely. So this gives now a micro business room, like even a business with a turnover of under 2.3 million, to assess and say, do I want to register as a micro business? Do I want to register for turnover tax and pay a tax on my revenue? Or maybe I've got the requisite skills, I'm upskilling, I know that my business is growing, I want to start keeping records of my expenses, I want to start assessing the deductibility of my expenses. But definitely it gives the small business owner that decision-making power now.
That's fantastic. And I think when you look at it from the perspective, from an economic growth perspective, this is helping the economy. This budget to me was to stimulate the economy, to stimulate economic growth, which we need in South Africa.
Yes, and especially with this decreased compliance burden, that tying with these increasing thresholds.
It will most definitely assist. So Fathima, are there any other significant amendments or changes that have been made to turnover tax?
So there is one. It's a technical amendment. Previously, micro businesses could only apply for turnover tax if they had a Feb year end. And that has now been relaxed. So a micro business, regardless of its year end, can now apply for turnover tax. So again, that's also a very welcome relief.
Oh, fantastic. And I think these are major wins that has come through for business. Let's talk about CGT, and more especially from the small business owners who are seeking to sell their business or restructure their business. So I understand, and I think most of us believe that the tax threshold for CGT has increased to 2.7 million rand with a market value of 15 million rand. Can you unpack that for us and make us understand how that is going to work?
Yes, this is a very important retirement provision for a small business owner. So a small business owner that is looking to, like you said, dispose of his business, or maybe he wants to restructure and transfer the business now into his children's names, provided he's 55 years of age and the business assets have a market value of less than 15 million rand, a capital gain of up to 2.7 million rand can be excluded from CGT.
So Fathima, is it actually that simple?
Naeem, I think you know that tax is never that simple. Important considerations here are having an asset valuation. And an incorrect asset valuation can have unintended tax consequences, because we are looking at business assets that are valued at under 15 million rand. Another key consideration is that it's not all business assets that qualify. So you need to look at which business assets, and the age and the timing of this disposal is key, because the business owner needs to be 55 years or over. So I think with regard to this and CGT being quite a complex area, a business owner that's looking to restructure or dispose can be aware of this, but it's always important to seek professional advice.
I think after you unpacking that, I think most definitely it's not that simple. It's a lot more complicated. And to take your advice, or rather to reiterate, I think a tax professional you are going to require for your CGT calculations. So Fathima, were there any employee-related benefits or amendments that were made, and any interesting ones, I might add?
Okay, so the interesting one for a small business owner would be the Long Service or Bravery Award. Previously, a business could make a Long Service Award or a Bravery Award to an employee of up to 5,000 Rand without the employee then having to pay fringe benefit tax. That has now increased to 16,000 Rand. So that is a nice way for the small business owner to reward loyal staff members or to just boost staff morale. And the employee will get a benefit of up to 16,000 Rand with no fringe benefit tax.
That's fantastic. And Fathima, about donations, have there been any changes on the donation side?
So I'll speak to the one change. Now individuals can make donations of up to 150,000 Rand a year. And that threshold has been increased. Previously, it was 100,000. So this is an important threshold increase for redistribution of wealth.
And that's a significant increase from 100,000 to 250,000 Rand.
Yes.
So let's talk about tax-free investments. How will the changes in the tax thresholds for tax-free investments help and assist small business owners in their personal capacity?
Another great question, Naeem. So for a small business owner that wants to extract profits from his business and invest personally, the tax-free investment account still remains a very efficient vehicle. So what this means is that an individual can now contribute up to 46,000 Rand annually to a tax-free investment account. There is a lifetime limit of 500,000 Rand, but the tax-free investment account is free of all tax consequences, whether that's CGT, donations tax, or income tax.
That's a really fantastic investment vehicle, wouldn't you say?
I think it's important for everybody to consider, not just small business owners.
So let's talk about tax-free investments. How will the new changes in tax-free investments assist and help business owners in a personal capacity?
Another great question, Naeem. For a small business owner who wants to extract profits from his business and invest personally, the tax-free investment scheme remains one of the most efficient vehicles. An individual can contribute up to 46,000 Rand a year into these accounts, and there's a lifetime limit of 500,000 Rand. And what this means is that the returns, whether that's interest, dividends, or capital gains, are free from tax.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think, every individual who can afford it should take out this tax-free investment. It is one of the most efficient and one of the most tax efficient and easiest ones, or are the investment vehicles to use?
Certainly. So I think it's a baseline investment before you look to more sophisticated schemes.
And for personal income tax, how have these changes helped me and you as individuals and millions out there?
So the tax tables have been adjusted to avoid bracket creep. What that means is that if your salary has now been inflation adjusted, you will not be automatically finding yourself into a higher tax bracket. So this is a bit of a quieter amendment, but definitely a very key one.
No, definitely. And I think it's one of the most important from an employee perspective of what their take-home salary would be, or rather the less tax that they would be paying due to inflation and bracket creep.
Yes.
If you had to summarize the overall message of the 2026 budget, what would be your key takeaways?
I think the key theme out of the 2026 budget has been reduced compliance burden and encouraging economic growth.
And I think that's a significant overall message that we have received from the Minister of Finance, that to decrease that burden, that administrative burden, and I think most importantly, as Fathima has mentioned, to stimulate economic growth. Economic growth is what is required in this country, and we have to all work together to ensure that we grow economically. So you are a member of SAICA's National Tax Committee. Can you tell us a little bit more about this committee and what it does?
Yes, Naeem. I am a member of SAICA's National Tax Committee, often referred to as the NTC. And the NTC plays a very important role in the tax landscape in South Africa. So as the NTC, we review draft legislation, proposed amendments, and policy documents that are issued by National Treasury and SARS. We then make comments on these on behalf of the profession.
Wow, that seems like an awful lot of work to be done, or rather to do. So how does the NTC then advocate for taxpayers?
The objective of the NTC is to ensure that tax legislation is practical, clear, and administratively workable, especially for businesses and tax practitioners that have to apply it in real life.
No, I think that's a very important function of the NTC, is the advocacy part of the process. Just moving on from there about the NTC. So how does the NTC help small businesses?
When draft legislation is released, it sometimes has unintended tax consequences for small businesses who do not have access to resources. So by making comments and recommendations, the work of the NTC contributes to making the tax landscape for small businesses more workable and more efficient.
That's great to hear how the NTC is working to assist these small businesses. And again, as mentioned earlier on, how important the work of the NTC is, or the National, or SAICA's National Tax Committee, in reviewing draft legislation, the advocacy part of things, and coming up with these practical ways of which the tax laws can be implemented. And I'm sure that you agree with me that sometimes it is quite difficult to implement some of these tax laws that have been enacted on a more practical basis. And what are your thoughts about that?
So that's exactly where the work of the NTC comes in, because the members are committed to the tax profession, to the industry, to bringing their years of experience, and to advocating for the taxpayer, especially smaller businesses who may not have access to resources.
No, that's great. So thank you, Fathima, again, once again for coming here and being on our show, the SAICABiz Podcast. So thank you to our viewers for taking the time to watch us. We look forward to seeing you at the next one.